Okay, it's episode 4 of our Aravaipa Colorado podcast. Today we're sitting down with Jason Koop, ultramarathon runner, podcaster, author, and coach. Koop is a staple to the Colorado community and the ultra running community as a whole. He's been coaching for over 20 years and is one of the most educated and research-based coaches you can find. Not only that, but he's also an accomplished ultra runner himself as a Badwater 135, Hard Rock 100, Leadville 100, and Tour de Gaunt finisher, plus many, many more that I won't even begin to go into and mention. Most recently, Koop took on Aravaipa's own Cocodona 250, a 250-mile foot race in Arizona, and took 6th male with a time of 75 hours, 47 minutes, and 25 seconds. Today, we will focus on Koop's journey coaching and also his experience training and running the Cocodona 250. Take a listen. Here's Jason Koop. All right, cool. I'm here with Jason Koop, ultra runner himself, coach, author, podcaster, all the above. Well known for all things ultra running, and super excited to have you here with us. So welcome.
Thanks. That's a lot of titles. Sometimes I don't realize I do all that much in a day.
I think you do a lot.
I try.
Yeah. So I obviously know of you. I've gone through about 3/4 of your book, so I haven't quite. Wow. I was trying to finish before Cocodona. I didn't get through all of it, so I feel like I've gotten some knowledge from you, so I'm grateful. But I haven't actually run into you in person, and so I'm excited to get to know you a little bit more and just find out more about you as a person, and then you as the runner, coach, podcaster, author, all those things too. So, Colorado, how long have you lived here?
I moved here in 2001, basically straight out of college. I'm a Texan, by trade, by birth, and I came up here really to get out of the summer heat in Texas, so I could train in a reasonable fashion. It's 10 degrees every single day. That's way too hot in Central Texas. And so I needed an internship to kind of satisfy some graduation requirements, and I was looking for a place to train. I just happened to stumble on a place here that kind of met all those requirements and fell in love with the area, and I really haven't turned back since.
Okay. Where in Texas were you living?
I grew up in Dallas, but I went to Texas A&M University.
Okay.
So big, huge, in-state public education type of school. Yeah. And absolutely loved it there. I loved the experience that I had there. I ran, collegiately there for 5 years, and it was just a phenomenal experience, just kind of on all levels, just personally, academically, and then professionally. Kind of helped me kind of launch into, what I'm doing today. But I mean, you really can't beat where I live now for trail running and outdoors, and really all things sports. I mean, if you think about, the training center here and that ecosystem that's around the Olympic Training Center brings in a lot of other professionals, physical therapists, and strength and conditioning specialists and things like that. So from a professional perspective and from a personal perspective, it checks all the boxes and then more.
Yeah, totally. I was born in Dallas. I will not be going back. So
wow.
Yeah, I agree.
Right.
Colorado fits the bill for if you're looking for like the active lifestyle, and then professionally, for you especially, being able to consult with people all in that realm is probably really helpful.
It was an easy choice. I can't say that it was all very deliberate and like master planned or anything like that, but I was very fortunate to kind of walk into the professional situation that I walked in, and having that ecosystem around me that I could really lean on when I was a kind of a knucklehead coach and really didn't know what I was doing. It was very, very, very fortunate.
So when you moved out here, were you immediately stepping into coaching, or what did you do when you first got to Colorado?
Well, so I've been a coach for a long time. I mean, starting when I was 16, my summer track coach that I had, Tom Clark, who I have a debt of gratitude that I'll never be able to pay to him. He first fostered the love of coaching with me by just giving me responsibility over this youth track and field team. And I enjoyed it a lot, but it was never something at the time that a lot of people did professionally. There were kind of 2 coaching tracks at the time. The first one was to be a collegiate cross-country and track and field coach, and that really didn't appeal to me that much, because it's just the same group of coaches that just rotates jobs every 3 or 4 years around that entire industry. And then the other side of it was to work for a national governing body at the training center, and as much respect as I have for them, that wasn't really appealing to me either. And so I always knew I wanted to coach, but I didn't really know how to actually facilitate it because there was no pipeline. And so it just happened to be kind of like the right person at the right time when online coaching started to become, more prevalent. And basically it was facilitated by the internet. And this is like 2001, 2002 that this started happening. And the fact that we could transfer files more easily between coach and athlete, and I could coach people that were across the country and across the world using what we would now consider really crude, mechanisms of emailing files back and forth and opening them up in their native software and stuff like that. But because that was all going on at the time, it really enabled me to take this love that I had for coaching and parlay it through an avenue that previously really didn't exist. And so, I moved here for that, and I really haven't looked back since. It's been a really crazy journey because it's not one that you could have ever predicted, nor did anybody think would ever succeed, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it worked out for you.
Well, because at the time, I couldn't describe what I was doing to my mother, right? That this is how I've always positioned it. It's like, well, most people would think of their coach as their high school basketball coach with a clipboard, in this notion that I can be here located in Colorado Springs and I could coach somebody effectively anywhere by looking at their files and communicating with them over the internet. In 2001, let's remember the time frame there.
Yeah.
2001, that was a really novel idea and not something that we really could describe to other people. Once again, I couldn't really describe it to my mother, and she just thought I was throwing away this college education that I'd earned and I'd fought very hard for. So now to look back on that, over 20 years later, it's actually really neat because now it's an accepted practice, not only in ultra running, but in all the endurance disciplines.
Yeah, things have evolved so much with online coaching and just coaching in general with athletes in the endurance world.
Yeah.
So that's right. You were like the start of it, or at the start of it, if not the start of it.
Well, I went in fits and starts. So, I mean, I very vividly remember in the mid 2000s, I was only working with traditional runners, marathon runners, 10Ks and things like that. Traditional runners, triathletes and cyclists. And the triathletes and cyclists were really they were the first to adopt online coaching because they had the better tools at the time. They had power meters and things like that to where the coaches just had an enabler to facilitate this remote-based endurance coaching. But I went around to all the top trail and ultra runners in the mid 2000s trying to pitch coaching to them because I thought it was, it's a complicated sport, it's arduous, there are all these intertwining performance factors, and whenever that's the case, bringing in expert counsel, whether it's a coach or nutritionist or a sports psychologist or whatever, always makes more sense. And I not only got 100% no's, that's factual, 100% no's, and that's not from lack of trying. I got laughed at a lot of meetings, and this is by some really well recognized and would still be very recognizable names in the space, and it was so disheartening at the time that I actually gave up on it for a few years. Where I just thought that the sport of trail and ultra running needed a little bit more time to mature, or the people would never kind of come around to it. I didn't know what was going to happen.
Right.
And so I gave up on pitching coaching to that group for a couple of years, and it just so happened that in the kind of like the late 2000s, for one reason or another, the community started to kind of come around to it. And some of that, I'll take a little bit of credit for. Some of that was facilitated by some results that I personally was getting with some of the athletes that I was working with. But I just think that overall the space was maturing more than anything else. So to see it go from getting laughed at meetings to now being a recognized part of the entire culture, I think it's pretty cool. It's been neat to see that transition happen.
Yeah, that's really cool. And now it seems like the majority of ultra running athletes are using coaches. There's obviously still a good number that aren't, but it seems like it's definitely more prevalent and people prioritize that in their training. Do you feel that way? Or?
Whether it's that or whether it's getting what I would call expert counsel, right? Whether it's from a coach or whether it's from a nutritionist or whether it's from, any kind of number of experts in the area, seeing that level of sophistication is, like I said, it's really rewarding. I think it's ultimately good for the sport. And having seen that transition across all of the endurance sports and having lived through that transition across cycling and triathlon predominantly, it really is a mirror image of them, but 10 years later.
A little bit.
Yeah, so anyway, we're a decade behind in a lot of areas, but it's just part of the newness of the sport. It's not, to poke fun at the people that are participating. It's just really a facet of when it started and how it's developed more than anything else.
Yeah. Well, now there's even more trail runners out there looking to get into ultras, and so like the scope of people participating is bigger. So I feel like that's maybe played into it as well. Like it used to be such a small number of people that were into ultras, and that it's kind of exploded where now your average person is interested in doing an ultra, and those people are utilizing coaches as well. So there's a bigger maybe market of runners out
well
there.
That's for sure, but we always have to keep in mind that it's still a pretty small community. You can fit all of the North American ultra running participants into the fields of the Boston Marathon, the Chicago Marathon, and the New York City Marathon, or pretty close. So, I get it. We're still in like hockey stick growth.
Yeah.
But
it's still small comparatively.
But it's still a very, very, very small community, but growing really rapidly. I mean, Aravaipa is part of that growth cycle, right? Where you guys now have an office here in Colorado. And, nobody would have, maybe Jamil dreamed of this because he's a genius, but not a lot of people would have dreamed of that, 5 or 7 years ago, where there would be so much demand across the space that you could pop up races wherever, whenever, kind of every single weekend, and there's almost an insatiable demand for those. And so once again, I just think the growth is really cool. We see it happen across a multitude of different areas, and once again, professionally speaking, it's been a ride, that's for sure.
Cool. Well, I feel grateful that you're in Colorado because like I said in the beginning, I suck your knowledge too. And then people like you. I'm like I'm not like total nerd on things, but I do like to read about it and try to be somewhat educated. So I don't totally screw myself up when I'm training. So you're one of the people that I look to because I think you have like a good perspective on things. And like you're hard on your opinions, which I think is a good thing. Because I think the more people that have opinions, like the more you have to draw from and like hear from different people's views.
Where you see that a lot now though is actually in the nutrition space, where the nutrition industry right now, and especially the really good registered dietitians and the really high performance registered dietitians and nutritionists are actually having a really hard time because everybody has an opinion. Everybody eats, and so therefore they have some sort of superior knowledge to tell you how everybody else should eat. And it's getting to the point where it's no longer acceptable just to provide good information. They have to fight back on the misinformation side of things.
Right.
And that what you mentioned, that deliberate, like hard stance, that's intentional on my part because of that same phenomenon where we get a lot of people into the space. And yes, we need to draw from other people's experiences, opinions, and things like that. But we do need to say, hey, listen, these are good practices in coaching and in training, and these practices are not so good. And I take that seriously as a professional because in some cases, not in a lot of cases, but in some cases, people's livelihoods are at stake when they're professional athletes. Yeah. But in a lot of other cases, their health and safety are at stake. And I want a healthy ecosystem just as much as, in fact, more so than anybody else out there because I earn my living doing it. Right. And so I feel obligated as somebody who has been in the space for a long time to make sure that large Titanic of a ship continues to get steered in the correct direction, because when it gets steered in the wrong direction, all of the people that were doing a good job eventually get pushed out of the space, and the people who are just sensationalizing everything, this is what we're seeing in nutrition, they're the ones who end up profiteering off of the whole thing. And that ends up long-term being bad for the entire community. And I do think that the people who have been here, they kind of have an obligation to prevent things like that from happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's why I like your book, because it's very just information-based.
It's not very sexy.
Yeah, but it provides like straight up facts and information. And so that to me is always the most valuable.
Yeah, it's I'm not known for putting a lot of fluff around stuff.
Yeah.
Let's just put it.
Because I'm sure you have opinions, but when you have an opinion, you provide the information that goes with it. And you're not just like shouting ideas out.
Well, it kind of goes back to my coaching upbringing. I mean, I mentioned earlier that I was really fortunate in the situation that I was in. A great deal of that fortune has to do with I was surrounded by extremely experienced and very successful coaches and physiologists that were extremely hard on me. Like really, like by today's standard, they would get accused of abuse or something like that. Like that's how hard they were on me. And I relished that. I was like, listen, I want the, I want the scrutiny. I really want these things to be nitpicked apart because I want to be better. I want to be the best that I can. And once again, that's not an intentional design by my part. That's just the situation that I fell into that I just happened to take advantage of. So a lot of the tone and the architecture behind any of the content that I produce, whether it's the book or social media or kind of whatever, has that long-standing background behind it where I literally would have one of the best people in the world over my shoulder going, Koop, you need to think about this differently. You're not doing this correctly. Go and look this up.
Yeah. And
they would inevitably be right because they have 30 years of experience and I had 3 months. So once again, that was just really impactful, and I owe those people a big debt of gratitude. But it shows up in the content and the way that it's formulated.
Yeah, very cool. Well, tons of information in your brain. So
I try to get it all out.
Yeah, getting it out is great for all of us. But
I'm at the age where I'm trying to keep it now.
So that's why you write it down. So.
Yeah, exactly. Good point. Yeah. I need to do more of that.
So one of the big reasons I wanted to have you on was to talk about your Cocodona experience and kind of everything that went into that. So that's where we're really going to focus for the next bit of this.
Cool.
And so I want to start off just kind of like, how did you hear about it? Like what made you hear, or how did you hear about it? And like, then what made you be like, yeah, I think I'm going to do it.
Well, it's impossible to not hear about it because of Aravaipa's media presence. So kudos to you guys for like flooding the space with all of this content that we can produce. But no, honestly, like the first year I had athletes do it, and I probably did a poor job coaching that first year, not really knowing how hard the race was, not giving it credit for being super mountainous and all this kind of stuff. But to be honest with you, what really struck me was I was driving back from Javelina. Every year I go to Javelina. We have a ton of athletes there, and so we go out there and support them. I was driving back from Javelina, and anybody who's familiar with the area knows that the drive back basically kind of parallels the course. And the entire time I'm looking over my left shoulder, and I'm going, you know what, that'd be really cool to run all that stuff. Like I've always wanted to run out there. I've heard there's cool trails out there. It's a neat, mountain range and things like that. You go through Flagstaff, and it's a cool area. And so it was really then, November 1 or whenever that was, that I decided, hey, I'm going to go ahead and, plonk down for this race. It's a cool race. It'd be a good challenge. Second year, I want to kind of get involved. And so, yeah, I mean, it really just started with, initially hearing about the inaugural event and then making that serendipitous drive on the way back, which just happened to coincide with the release of the film, I think, which maybe had a little bit to do with it.
Yeah.
But the drive really did it. I mean, it shows you the entire landscape, in a couple hour period. And whenever I've been able to, I do know that whenever I've had the opportunity to do courses like that, where you can drive around or the course actually tells a logical story from beginning to end, that's something that's really impactful to me. And I could see that unfold just on that drive and from what I knew of the course and what I knew of the other races that were around that area.
Right. Okay. Had you done a 200 plus before?
Yeah, so I did Tour de Géant in 2019.
Okay.
And with a similar philosophy, right? I mean, I'd been in the area before, going to UTMB for several years. I'd coached athletes for Tour de Géant. I really liked the concept of doing an entire loop course around one valley, and the entire valley comes out to support the event, and it's very much a part of the culture of that region and things like that. So yeah, I had some, longer than 100-mile chops, although that's, one singular experience before I jumped into this one.
Okay. And when the fire happened, the Crooks fire, and it changed the first part of the course, what was your first thought?
Well, I'd done like so much heat training, and not only that, I'd spent a lot of time on the first part of the course. So I went out there and I did part of it after the Black Canyon 100K. I had athletes out there, so I just spent some time out there afterwards and did a training camp, and then I went to the training day that you guys hosted there. Right. So the first part was like, you don't get the authentic, the real experience or whatever, but at the end of the day, I'm just super grateful that there was a race at all, because it could very easily not happen. And shout out to the whole race management team, Jamil and Steve and everybody else, for pulling that off, because I know what the permitting process is like and what event management is like, and the fact that they were able to orchestrate it in such a smooth fashion with all the communication that was coming out and things like that is just. It's just quite remarkable, and it speaks to the entirety of the organization, how professional everybody is. So, it was initial bum, to get back to your question, bum like everybody else, but at the end of the day, like I said, I was just super grateful to be able to do it at all.
Do you think that because of the course change, maybe you would do Cocodona again in a number of years to get the full?
For sure. Yeah. Okay. I don't know whether it's going to be next year or the year after that or whatever, but I want to come back and get another crack at it. Just even if the course changed, it still would be an awesome event. Yeah. And I would do it just for that. So yeah, I want to do it again some point. I don't know when that's going to be. Okay. And was it easier, harder, or like just as hard as you expected it to be? I'd say it was par to expectations. I mean, I don't get too pretentious about where I finish in the field or any of that other stuff. I just want to have a good experience and kind of challenge myself, and it definitely lived up to the bill there. It's when you're doing 250 miles, you're in for a 70 or 80 hour race or whatever, the difficulty kind of takes care of itself, irrespective of whether you have to go through heat or mountains or big long stretches without aid stations, or you run into wildlife or whatever it is. Like, just the duration itself tends to take care of all those variables.
Yeah. Did you see any snakes?
No, I didn't, but when I was training, I saw a Gila monster.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
And I didn't even know what it was.
Yeah.
So I almost stepped on it. It was actually on the first part of the course. So I almost stepped on it at first, and it was cute. It's pink, I'm like, oh, what a cute little thing. I learned later it's poisonous.
Poisonous, and like pretty aggressive, I think, if you like mess with it.
Yeah, I was like following it. I've got a video of it. I was like following it off into the bushes. They are really cute. My brother had a bearded dragon, my younger brother who lives in Scottsdale. He had a bearded dragon when he was in college, and I always make fun of him for it because he named it Dr. Dre. Okay. And so I sent him the video. I'm like, hey, it's Dr. Dre's girlfriend, because it was pink. I had no idea it was a male.
He's like, get away from it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what he's like. That thing's poisonous, man. It's gonna bite you.
Yeah. Oh my
but
God.
No snakes, just Gila monsters.
Scorpions?
No scorpions.
I saw a lot of scorpions.
Yeah.
Okay, got pretty lucky then.
Yeah, either that or I wasn't paying attention. It's probably the latter.
Yeah, probably too tired to care. Yeah. Cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about your training going into it. So I'm excited to hear about this and what you decided was the best form of attack, because now I know, for me personally, what I did going into it, I would do totally differently if I was going to do a 200 plus again. So I want to hear what you did.
What would you do different?
I would do a lot longer hiking days. I was really focused still on running, and the pace I was going, I finished in 116 hours, so it was pretty slow. So it was a lot of hiking. Yeah,
you're 70% hiking at that point.
Yeah, and so I was sick of hiking, and I wanted to run actually because I was so sick of hiking, but I would have rather have done more in training to get those muscles. So let's hear about you though.
Well, so the timing of this is really serendipitous, because I gave a presentation to our coaches the first thing this morning about this whole thing, and so I'll give you and the audience the same caveats that I gave them. This is my training, right? Like capital MY training.
You and Sasha the Shredders.
Me and my dog Sasha. Yeah, it's my training, and for whatever reason, because of who I am, people want to emulate that. People always ask like what I'm doing, and as a coach, I know that you should always put a heavy amount of emphasis on individualizing that training for that person. Mm-hmm. And so what I did doesn't necessarily need to be copy pasted to somebody else. Now the principles can still apply, and those are more important versus what did I do for my longest long run, or what was my biggest training block, or what specific food did I eat at Munns Park or whatever it was. Yeah. The principles can still apply, and the volume and intensity can kind of scale down, but the specifics usually don't apply. So I did a lot of volume. I react really well to volume. I can handle it. I certainly don't get hurt from it all that often. But that being said, when I decided I was going to do the race in November, it took about 1 month just to get my legs underneath me. And then I did a very prototypical start with high intensity, lower volume, and then move to lower intensity, higher volume as that time from December all the way to May progresses. And so what that looked like was December and January were about 13 to 14 hours per week, training. I do everything by hours, not by miles. So 13 to 14 hours per week, that's on the lower side for me. But on top of that, I was doing a lot of very high intensity interval work. So I do, 4 by 4 minutes hard, 4 minutes easy up Gold Camp Road, which you're familiar with, right? So it's very smooth gravel road, 8% grade or something like that. I just hammer up that. Or I do 6 sets of 6 by 45 seconds hard, 15 seconds easy. So really, really high intensity work twice a week, 13 to 14 hours. And during that time, my longest long runs were still in the 6-hour range, 7-hour range, so 50K. So I felt like I could always do a 50K and be no worse for wear. And then in the February, March timeframe, that volume moved up to, let's just say 18-ish hours, plus or minus a couple. And I did a lot of threshold work. So 5 or 6 times 10 minutes hard, 5 minutes easy. That kind of work. I do that twice a week, bump up the mileage. And then in March and April, I shifted the volume up again. And the focus at that point really became on concentrating a lot of high volume efforts in a short period of time. So I do these 2 to 4 day training camps where I do anywhere between 20 and 30 hours across those 2 to 4 days. So anywhere from 10 hours to 7 hours or something like that, back to back to back, or back to back to back to back. Yeah.
You're a training machine.
I mean, well, but at the same time, once again, I'm not pretentious about it. So I'll give you an example. So I used the training day that you guys put on as part of a block. Mm-hmm. So I came out to Arizona. I did 5 hours the first day, 5 hours the second day. The third day was the day where it was the first 37 miles, so that took me 9.5 hours. And then I did the last 40 miles of the course from Fort Tuthill to the finish on the last, or I did that second to last day anyway. I'm flipping the days around, but you kind of get the point. But I took the next 3 days completely off. I didn't run a step for 3 days in a row. So, once again, the concentration or the emphasis just became on putting in all these, kind of consecutive high volume effort. And I wouldn't do that much with everybody, but the same effect is true, meaning doing a lot of high volume concentration within a short period of time, and then on the rest of the days of the week doing nothing or doing very, very little. Yeah, I think that's reasonable for most people. I mean, we for years we hosted a training camp here in Colorado Springs out of my house. Mm-hmm. And most people it was over Memorial Day weekend, so just this past weekend. And we would set it up as a 3-day camp, and most people that were coming in would triple their normal volume over that 3 days, which is something as a coach you would very rarely, if ever, prescribe in that fashion. Let's just triple your daily volume for 3 days in a row. That's kind of an asinine statement. But because they're coming to a camp and because they don't have work that weekend and because they're putting away all their other like duties as otherwise specified, they can handle that intensified training period. So the theme I would apply to almost anybody, although the level would be quite different. And I had precedent from that coming from Tour de Géant. That's more or less what I did for my biggest training blocks leading into that race. So I knew I had some background that I could handle that and really not be all that worse for wear.
Yeah.
The other thing is I went really slow during those. And the people out of the training camp could probably, profess to that, where I was not the fastest person, at that training camp or any of the other days that I was out there. I mean, I'm trying to run as close to race pace as possible, which is almost impossible in training.
Yeah.
But they're all very, very, very easy efforts, so I could, essentially recover after them much more quickly.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. See, that's good to know because, I could never put the volume that you're putting in. Just like one time, is not there for me. And then I feel like I would definitely get injured if I was putting in your kind of volume. But I could do the back-to-back days with less volume, And I feel like that would have translated better because I only did 2 back-to-back days of bigger volume for me. And I feel like if I had done maybe more 3 or 4 day blocks like that, then that feels like that's more relatable to the race.
Well, once again, you got to think about the individual, right? So I ran my first marathon at 13. I'm now 43. So that's 3 decades. And I was never a very good runner, but I always trained very hard, right? Throughout my entire life with very, very, very little interruption in any of it. So since I was 13, all through junior high, all through high school, all through college, 5 years, it took me 5 years to graduate, 5 years of Division I cross-country program where we trained really hard. And then after that, moving into a professional setting where I was kind of forced to train hard all the time because I had to be fit for camps and all these other activities that I did.
Yeah.
That's meaningful over the course of a long period of time. And I'm not going to ask you your age on camera, but I can tell that you don't have that total background. So once again, the philosophy makes sense where you can parlay the philosophy in there. It might take you another 15 years to build up the amount of training volume to handle all that stuff. So once again, I think that strategy of putting in concentrated training loads, and you could do it on the intensity side too.
Yeah.
But we just happen to be talking about volume. Putting in concentrating training loads where 2 to 4 days, you're essentially accomplishing 80% of your total training load. That can be a very effective way to seek out adaptation versus peanut butter spreading that load out throughout the week. If you take 2 training programs, one's 10 hours per week, and you're doing it in 5 2-hour runs, right? You take another training program that's 10 hours per week, where those 5 days are 3 hour, 1 hour, 3 hour, 1 hour, 3 hour, 1 hour. That latter program's probably going to, it's definitely going to produce superior adaptations because of that concentration effect of that training load. That's a fairly long-standing principle. Now it's just a matter of how you manipulate it to each individual.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. When you were doing your runs, did you focus a lot on specific vert throughout training, or did you plan your runs to get harder climbing runs, or because I think I remember reading something that you said about even your tempo runs you'll do back in Cheyenne Canyon on more of the terrain that you're going to race on, versus a lot of people when they think of their tempo run they'll go to Santa Fe Trail because they want to get the speed part of it. So do you think about that in your own training?
Yeah, so what you just mentioned is an error. That's one of those things that those coaches that I mentioned earlier, they would yell at me for.
Yeah.
Because speed is inconsequential in this race. I mean, you just mentioned that, it took you 116 hours, right? Speed, whether you're running your tempo runs at 8-minute pace or 10-minute pace is completely irrelevant to the adaptive process that you're seeking because it's so much faster than 25 minutes per mile or whatever that ends up coming out to be. The cardiovascular, the cardiopulmonary adaptations are really what you're seeking, and so it's a roundabout way of getting to the answer. The specific work I would always do uphill, and it's for three reasons. The first one I just mentioned is the speed is kind of inconsequential. Second one is it acts as a little bit of a hedge against injury, since the impact forces aren't as high running uphill and you're going a little bit slower, so you're just kind of hedging your bets and things like that. But the third thing is you can typically induce a greater cardiovascular stimulus and therefore adaptation by going uphill versus on flat level ground, particularly for ultra runners that are a little bit speed limited. And we see this play out in the physiology lab, where many of the VO2 max protocols, so if you're doing a graded exercise test, which is trying to elicit the highest amount of oxygen that you can consume, many of them, not all of them, but many of those protocols will choose to increase the grade towards the end of the test versus increasing the speed.
Okay.
And the reason that that's important is the physiologists way back when they were developing this, they recognized that increasing the grade was just a better way to squeak a little bit more oxygen out of the equation than leaving it on flat level ground, and everybody's trying to manipulate the situation to get the best number possible.
Yeah.
So anyway, I would contrive those intervals specifically in that way, where they were, basically all uphill. But in terms of the overall grade, Cocodona is a unique course in that it has some fairly significant climbs, but then it also has these long stretches of just flat, runnable for forever types of sections. And so living where I live, I tried to contrive most of my training where I was running most of the time. I did a lot of Intamin Trail, which you're familiar with, which is, I'd say really conducive trail to this type of race. Overall, what I always try to do with myself and with any of the athletes that I work with is just take a really gross look at how much climbing there is during the race total, divide it by the total number of miles, and then you get some sort of ratio, and then you try to match that as closely as possible in training. And all that does is acts as a little bit of an insurance policy that you're getting roughly the right types of grades. So I don't target like, I need 20,000 feet of vertical or whatever. That's an asinine way to manipulate training load, by the way. That's another story. But moreover, I would look at the ratio of miles to amount of vertical change and just make sure that it's in the right ballpark.
Okay. So let me ask you a question. You're going to be like, what was she doing? So I was worried about the first 37 miles.
Is this going to be like a coaching session? Do I need to send you a bill after this?
Yeah,
is this how this is going to work?
No, but I want to hear your opinion on this. It was like, because people look at certain sections of courses, right? And for me, I targeted in on the first 37 miles before the course changed, right? And I was worried about that climb. So one of my training runs, I did 4 inclines in a row. In your opinion, that is not a good idea, right?
Yeah, the incline. So first off, I have an affection for the incline because I still am on their board. I was a founding member of their board. I helped get it legalized. So I have a lot of affection for the incline. But the incline, and I'm going to get a lot of hate mail for this because I know there are a lot of athletes that use the incline as training, not just endurance athletes. You go over to the training center, the wrestlers use it, the judo players use, the judo athletes use it, the speed skaters use it, everybody uses it. It's a really non-specific training tool. And what I mean by that is that if you were doing a race on the incline, it'd be a great training tool, but there are no races like the incline.
Yeah.
So while it might be okay for just general fitness, it's going to have some cardiopulmonary adaptations, cardiovascular adaptations, and things like that. If you're using it in the manner you were using it for, which is a very specific manner, I'm using this for this first climb to emulate this first climb, you're really missing the boat. And you know that because the incline is way different than that first climb out there in terms of grade and speed and things like that. So a better strategy would be to use the incline just because you like to do it. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. Far away out from the event, December, January, no problem with that. But then as the race kind of gets closer, if you want to introduce any sort of specificity about that race, whether that's heat or a specific climb or speed or whatever, that's when you would start to look at things that are more specific to the race. And so whatever that first climb is, I can't remember off the top of my head. I mean, it would be similar to the Seven Bridges Trail or even Mount Rosa, which wouldn't be practical because it's not accessible. Right. But something like that would be much more applicable.
I think that's what people should dial in on, and what you said for even your own training is like looking at the race as a whole and your ratio of climbing for whatever distance you're doing versus like getting hung up on one part of a course and then trying to, in their own mind, making up that like this is going to simulate that?
Well, training towards one part of a course is not the worst idea out there if it's going to be a limiting factor. And what I mean by one part of the course is you got to kind of broaden it out from what most people will think about, which is just the terrain or a particular climb. If there's a particular piece of the environment, and in this case it'd be like the heat, or if there's a particular feature of the course that really is a showstopper, right? It's a linchpin. You kind of owe it to yourself to do extra training or have extra reinforcements in that area. And Cocodona and Badwater are great examples of this, where the heat can be such a limiting factor and such a showstopper. It's worth your while to bring in extra reinforcements from a training perspective and overcome that. It doesn't matter how well developed your cardiovascular system is or how many miles you've put in or how much descending you've done if you can't handle the heat, right? All that stuff goes out the window because the environment is such an overwhelming factor in a lot of these cases. So you're thinking about the limiting factors pieces is correct. It's the implementation where you get a little bit lost. And once again, I can't fault you for that. I probably got yelled at 100 times for mistakes like that back in the day. And I never would have known I was wrong if I didn't have better people around me. That's the other thing. So anyway, so next year you can go back and do, I don't know, 7 bridges right before the race, right?
Okay, so you mentioned heat, and that was going to be my next thing for you, was finding out what you did for heat training, because obviously here in Colorado, you had to train through the winter. We had decent snow, not a ton, but we did have some cold times to get through. So what did you do to prep for that?
It snowed the week before the race. You remember that? I mean, so I use a sauna protocol. So it's just a dry sauna. I use the gyms at Vasa Fitness here locally. Most people have access to this kind of stuff. I used a 2-phase protocol, which it's newer. Using a sauna people have used for millennia, right? I mean, back to the ancient Greeks. But using it very specifically in the sport-specific contests, using a 2-phase protocol is newer within the past few years. And the way that it works out is about 6 weeks before the race, I would do 2 weeks of sauna exposure where I'm getting in there 5 to 6 days a week. And then for 2 weeks, all I'm doing is getting in the sauna every second or every third day. So it's kind of like a little maintenance session. Mm-hmm. And then in the last 2 weeks before the race, repeating essentially the first phase where I'm getting in the sauna 5 to 6 days per week. I do that immediately after a run. So in most cases, I'd go for a run and then I'd jump in my car and I'd drive straight to the gym and get in the gym. The saunas here are actually quite good. I mean, it's 210 degrees, 200 degrees most days that I was in there. So very, very effective. It's important to understand, since we've been through my training caveat. First off, I've done this a lot, and I've done a lot with athletes, so I kind of know how I adapt to it. But the second thing is that intermediate period of where I'm just using top-off sessions. That's where a lot of the heavy training was. So that training camp that I mentioned earlier, I intentionally staged things. So I got the first stage of sauna protocol out of the way. I went and did all the heavy run training, so I'm not getting fatigued by the sauna, and I'm just using kind of top-off sessions. And then during the taper or the last couple weeks of training, I'm reintroducing the sauna again. I feel that something like that for people who don't have hot weather and lots of hot weather leading up to a race is absolutely essential. And even people who are from Arizona, because of because of the timing of the race, I would probably use it for a lot of athletes that are in Arizona as well. One of our coaches was asking about that this morning, because if you do it right, it's a very low cost intervention in terms of the total amount of time. You're talking about 20 to 30 minutes per exposure session, 5 to 6 days per week. It might cost you $20 to $40 for a gym membership. So that entire cost is not that high. You can arrange it in such that if you're doing a good job with it, it doesn't impact your training all that much. But the effects that you get from it are quite robust. Mm-hmm. This literature is very, very well established. I've had a number of people on my podcast talk about it, most notably Julian Perriard, originally from Canada, now he's in Australia. But when you think about it, it behooves not only endurance sports, but team sports as well, to be able to have acclimated athletes, because it's such a performance breaker in all different types of sports. And so football study it, soccer has studied it, endurance sports have studied it, track and field and things like that, all with their different applications. And what that creates is a robust body of literature to draw from, where you really know what the bang for the buck is when you do these types of things. So, like I said, I think it's a smart intervention to do. It's a relatively easy one, low cost, and the one that I have been favoring over the past few years for everybody, and this is the one that I did, is this two-phase setup where it's a super concentrated phase and then a maintenance phase and then a super concentrated phase, kind of all in succession.
Okay. When you're in the sauna, do you try to do any like movement, or do you just be?
No. So one of my first ultramarathon experiences was going to the Badwater Ultra, and the Badwater runners, they're getting better about this, but there was a time where they were notorious for just doing the most asinine, over-contrived training manipulations possible to try to combat the heat. And it's a little bit of as natural because, back in the day, it was held intentionally so that you were going through the hottest part of Death Valley during the hottest time of day, during the hottest period of the year. I mean, that was the whole design of the race. Now they have to have a night start for a whole host of reasons. But because of that, and if you've ever experienced that, it is unlike anything else. The one and only oh shit moment that I've ever had in my entire coaching career was the first year I was out there when I supported an athlete. And I remember this very vividly. I flew into Las Vegas, total air condition, whatever. I picked up our rental van. Everybody uses these minivans out there because they're good to crew out of. We stayed in our air-conditioned minivan for the entire drive from Las Vegas to Death Valley, and I opened up the door at it was 2 p.m. or something like that at Furnace Creek, and I stepped out of the minivan, and I out loud, I said, oh shit, I was completely unprepared for this environment. I did not realize exactly how hot it was, and I was having issues just moving empty coolers around. That's how hard it was. So anyway, these Badwater runners are very notorious for creating all of these contrived training manipulations where they would wheel their treadmill into their laundry room and disconnect the dryer vent and put the dryer vent in their face, and then they would have to top off that with an oil heater and put it behind the treadmill, and then they put on a full sauna suit, in addition to the 7 layers of sweats that they had on, and they run on the treadmill for 2 hours or something stupid like that. Those things are relatively ineffective. They're huge cost, huge physiological cost, with very little additional benefit as opposed to just sitting in the sauna. Okay. So I would go in there, and any athlete that is undertaking a sauna protocol should do the same thing. This is something where my training can equal your training. Just sit in it. This is a well-known physiological adaptation where all it takes is for your core temperature to get to a very specific marker, and almost all the adaptations take place. You don't need to exercise in it. If you want to do some light stretching in it just because you're bored, totally fine. But if you're thinking you're enhancing the adaptation by people want to do core work in it or jumping jacks or stupid crap like that, it doesn't enhance the adaptation that you get. You're just, staving off boredom, for lack of a better word.
Gotcha.
Just go and sit. It's totally fine.
So during the race, do you feel did you have any issues with the heat, or you felt fine?
Yeah, none.
Totally fine.
I mean, I probably could have thrown some ice in some water bottles a little bit earlier around Deer Park, from Deer Park to, what's the name of the pass Dead Horse State Park to Deer Pass. Okay. But other than that, I wouldn't have made any changes. I didn't use any other heat mitigation strategies, no ice sleeves or long sleeve shirts or anything like that. I felt that I handled it really, really well.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so just go the 2-approach method. What do you call it? The 2-block method.
Yeah.
And just sit and be.
Just sit. I mean, even if you just did it one though, and I used that for years. For Badwater athletes, Western States athletes, and things like that, where you're just using the last 14 days to create the adaptation, that's effective. And the reason that I like the 2-stage protocol is it's slightly more effective, but especially for people, and it's obviously more intrusive, right? It takes more time, more rigmarole. You got to drive to the sauna and things like that, drive to the gym, wherever it is. But for people that have not experienced it before, it's a good hedge against what if something goes wrong. Because if you're just doing it in the last 14 days, and maybe they don't adapt quite like you want them to, or maybe it's like too stressful, like that's a hard thing to retract, and it tends to weigh on people psychologically.
Yeah.
So just from a coaching standpoint, I realize that I'm far from infallible, right? I make a lot of mistakes coaching. I like to have a little bit of buffer when I give this to athletes, and so that first 2 weeks serves as you're kind of just flushing out how much training load they can handle on top of the sauna, and then the athlete also has the opportunity to kind of get their routine dialed and whatnot, because you're introducing something that's a little bit different. So preferably 2-phase. If you don't have that and you're willing to roll the dice, or you have some experience, you can get away with doing a 1-phase. Heat acclimation, this is really important for the people who are listening to this. It is an acute adaptation. So it only takes 5 to 7 days to get 90% of the benefit.
Wow.
It also goes away very quickly. It's a very transient adaptation too, so it gets removed very quickly. But if you think that you're going to, get some sort of superior adaptation by staying in the sauna for 30 days consecutively before a race, I've got a bridge to sell you, because after the 7th or 9th day, there's basically no advantage, and all you're doing is introducing additional stress. So for the people that are, and ultra runners are so notorious for doing this, right? If a little is good, a lot is better. You only need several days in there to get most of the adaptations. That's why that 2-phase protocol is very specific, and 10 days to 2 weeks, then you have a maintenance phase, and then 10 days to 2 weeks. You don't need the entirety of that time to create all the adaptations.
That's good to know. That's important.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your fueling.
Mm-hmm.
So did you have a plan going into it? Probably, I'm guessing, based on your...
I do, yeah. There's a 5-point plan that's written down for my crew to follow. It's very simple.
Did you stick to it?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Every 50, 60 miles, eat pizza and fries.
Okay.
Every aid station, drink seltzer, ginger brew during the day, or coffee at night. Take 1 bottle of scratch per hour to the next aid station, and then do 250 calories an hour of something.
Okay.
And the something is Pro Bar Bolts, Honey Stinger waffles, the rice balls, which the recipe is in the book, the burrito, which is just another version of a rice ball wrapped in a burrito, essentially. And I actually introduced, this isn't brand new, but it was newer, these new precision hydration chews that most people know Precision Hydration for their hydration products, but they just started making chews. And they did a really good job with the flavoring of them, so I would mix those into it as well. But I would just rotate those, and I know how many calories are in each of them, and whatever I felt like eating or drinking, I would do that at the time, and as long as I hit 250 calories an hour, I kind of didn't care. I don't have any sponsorships or endorsements with any of those. It's just what I like.
Yeah.
I pay full price for all those, just like every regular person.
Right. And that plan worked for you? Like you didn't have any issues with it?
No, I did that the entire time. In training, I actually do a little bit more. I do like 250 to 300 calories an hour, so it's kind of a step down from what I normally train at. But yeah, I did that the entirety. And the only time I even had a little bit of an issue was when it got really hot, and I would get the entirety of that 250 calories an hour from the Scratched Out Labs drink mix. Okay. Because I was going through 3 or 4 bottles an hour.
Yeah.
And there's 80 calories in each of those bottles. So I was essentially covering my caloric requirement just through the drink. And after several hours of that, I'm just like, I gotta eat. I gotta have like something solid in my stomach. But that was for a very, very short period of time, maybe a couple hours. Okay.
Do you ever feel hungry like during, or by doing that plan you feel you're like totally satiated?
Yeah, I'm completely satiated. And I don't have a naturally iron stomach. Like I've had to toy with things over the years, and altitude exacerbates it like any normal person. So I'm not going to profess that, that anything and everything works for me. I've definitely like tailored this in over a number of years. But yeah, nutrition was not was not an issue, but it's also something I work on in training, right? I mean, I can remember when I did Tour de Giants, I'd go to the top of Pikes Peak and I'd get a pizza from there, and then I'd run down the other side, down the backside of Pikes Peak, and I'd eat the pizza while I was running downhill, and then come back up, and then get another pizza, and then come back down the front side. So anyway, it's all those foodstuffs and things like that they're not novel to me, right? They're things that I've taken in training, and they're things that I've done in the race as well.
Did you, when you finished, was there something that you were like really wanting at the finish line to eat or drink that you were like, you told your crew last time you saw them?
Just cold water. It was really weird. Once again, I wasn't hungry.
Yeah.
So it was just cold water, and yeah, I wasn't craving any one thing or other. And I kind of attest that to that I had the right like nutrient set up. Like normally when you're craving something afterwards, it's what you're devoid in or what you have devoided yourself of during the race. And I never really felt like that. Like I had a full meal pretty close afterwards. I did the same thing at Tour de Giants. I had a full meal in Courmayeur, like pretty much like right after the race before even getting back to the hotel.
Yeah.
So
I feel fine.
Yeah, well, I did not feel fine, I can tell you that. But from a eating perspective, I wasn't at either one of those experiences. I have been in the past, but I wasn't one of those people where it's just like I can't take in another whatever.
Yeah.
Right. If anything, I was just switching from one thing to another because of flavor fatigue or something else just looked better.
Yeah, it's good to have like your pocket of variety that you can kind of rotate between.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
What about sleep?
The $1 million question, right?
Did that go
Everybody
well for you?
always wants to know about this. I did something that's, I don't know how atypical it is or whether it's prototypical or not, because I always feel that like when people describe how they actually, people have a poor recollection of what they actually did out on the course.
Yeah.
And I've had this experience as a pacer where I've been pacing somebody and through a long period of a race, 100 miles, 200 miles or whatever, and then they describe the strategy that they were deploying out on the race. And I'm like, you didn't do any of that. Like I watched you the entire time. Like you did not eat 4 gels going up Handy's Peak. You ate 1. Like, so anyway.
In your mind, you think you did something.
Yeah. So, where was I going with that? So I don't know whether this strategy is atypical or prototypical or what, but I knew I would finish in right around 70 hours, or I thought that I would finish right around 70 hours. It's hard to tell based on with the course changes and stuff like that, like how accurate that would be. And so what I wanted to do was to get a little bit of sleep the first night and then sleep a lot the second night and then push through the rest of the race. And what I thought was what was going to happen is I was going to get to Mingus Mountain kind of like just before the crack of dawn, which would have been perfect. And I'd take a little sleep there. And then I would have taken a lot of sleep the first time we were at Munns Park. Mm-hmm. And then I would go from there to the out and back and then all the way into Flagstaff kind of in one push. And that's pretty much what I did. I mean, I got to Mingus Mountain. I took about 45 minutes in my van. I slept really good there, got out of there. It was really fortunate because I didn't realize how technical that section was, and I was glad I had a little bit more faculty, on that super rocky section, and it was light at the time. And then when I got to Munns Park, it was a little bit later than I thought I was going to be there, so the sun was already up, which was kind of a bummer, but I took 2 hours in my van there. And once I left that section, and that's, how long is that to go at that point? The first time you get there, that's mile 171. So I took that 2 hour nap, and once I woke up, I felt like I could have gone to the finish without, and I pretty much did go to the finish without sleeping at that point. So yeah, that's what I did. 45 minutes at the end of the first night, 2 hours kind of at the end of the second night, and that just happened to be Mingus Mountain and Munns Park for me, and then push through to the finish. And I felt that worked pretty well. I wouldn't do the same thing for a 120-hour finisher or even an 85-hour finisher. I might divvy it up a little bit different. But I think that this whole sleeping thing, nobody has a good handle on yet. I mean, everybody wants, my general sense is people want to push it too much to the non-sleeping side. and they don't realize that you get a lot of that back if you're just more alert.
Right.
And some of the research teases this out. I mean, in like skill sports, for example, if you go through a period of sleep restriction, so sleep restriction would be what we do during the race, right? You go until like 2 or 3 in the morning, you take a little bit of a nap, and then you wake up. That's sleep restriction versus sleep deprivation, which is entirely missing sleep for one night. We know that in skill sports, you deteriorate about 8%. So think about shooting a free throw or like target practice, you know, the pistol shooters and things like that. From an endurance perspective, you deteriorate about 4%.
Okay.
So I always feel that when you get a little bit more sleep, you turn that 4% deterioration into like 2%.
Yeah.
So when you think about a 100-hour race, you kind of gradually make it back by getting a little bit more sleep. I don't have anything other than that 2% math to like base that off of. But in general, when I'm coaching athletes, I'm trying to get them to first sleep at logical places and times. And we know this from the adventure racing scene, actually, in the late 90s. So in the heyday of expedition length adventure races, and I have a lot of colleagues that would attest to this. The teams that started to become the most successful were the ones that started to sleep earlier in those races. And they would give up all the time. And then later on in the race, when some team that was super far ahead made a navigational mistake, that's when the team that slept early would kind of like take over. And that race, that story of how the race played out went down for a few years before all the teams started catching on. And then they all started sleeping earlier, like the first night. So first and foremost, when I'm doing this with athletes, I have them sleep at logical times, which is towards the end of the night during the witching hour, right? And there's science behind the witching hour as well.
Worst part.
It's the worst part of the night, right? 2 to 4 in the morning or whatever. It's when everybody drops out, everybody falls asleep, everybody has their, epic hallucinations and all the bad things happen, right? So I try to get them to sleep if possible during that general time frame, and then at strategic points during the race. So where they can actually sleep versus having their head up on a rock or something like that. So where they can actually have some restorative sleep. So some of that is living in fantasy land because that's not always pragmatic to do. You got to like pick one or the other. But from a strategic standpoint, that's always how I've tried to set it up with athletes, where we look at how the race is going to play out. We try to find the time frames that make sense, and do those time frames match up with, can you actually take a nap there from whatever standpoint? It's too cold, do you need more gear, all that kind of stuff, and then let the race unfold from there. But my general sense is most people try to push it too much.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's
So
right
are
or
you
not.
not a huge fan of the trail nap? Like you'd rather get an athlete to, or you yourself would rather get to an aid station and actually get good sleep versus...
Well, there's blessing in it. So yes, I would rather them get to an aid station and get something restorative. You have to be really disciplined about that because it's very easy to let time evaporate, just getting comfortable and, you're in your little, you're in your sleeping bag and you've got it pulled over your head and it's dark and cozy and you don't want to sleep outside. For anybody who does Tour de Jante, they will literally kick you after 2 hours. And they are the Italians are not known for their timing precision, right? They're very like lackadaisical. Their buses can run whenever and go on whatever route. Like they're just not known for their timing. But for whatever reason during that race, me and the athletes that I've worked with have always had this experience that if you have a 2-hour limit in a cot, at that 2 hours, you are getting booted out of there, like with authority. So
maybe that's what they should have done at Cocodona.
I don't know. I don't know. They can do that because they've been around for a little bit longer. So maybe once Cocodona has 5,000 runners or whatever, and they've got to turn the cots over. But anyway, if you can pull it off and you can be super disciplined, that's definitely a better way to get more restorative sleep, which I think is really important in these longer events. If you have a lot of backpacking and fast packing type of experience, I'm more comfortable with having athletes take trail naps and things like that, or having that be a deliberate part of the strategy.
Yeah.
But most people who have their first introduction to that be a race where they're trying to take a trail nap, it goes south, right? They're wasting way more time than they're getting actual restorative sleep because it's a skill. I mean, it's a skill to know, where am I going to curl myself up? Do I need to get this far off of the trail? What clothes do I need so I don't freeze? Like all those things take time to develop, and then you actually have to be comfortable doing it.
Yeah.
Especially when there's scorpions around and Gila monsters that are going to come and bite you and stuff like that. And to have your first foray to take a trail nap be something like that is usually not a good experience, although some people are just forced into it. So like I said, preferably be in some place where you can actually get restorative sleep. Then if the situation dictates, I mean, you've been out in that situation before where you can't go any further. You just got to lay down and shut your eyes for a second. But I view that as very much a second choice, something that's not nearly as effective.
Yeah. Okay, cool. What about pacers and crew?
I had no pacers.
No pacers.
Intentionally, yeah. I just kind of like to keep things as simple as possible. Like strip it down to this is the plan, right? Just this silly little spreadsheet right here.
It's pretty nice book. You even bound it. So
well, no, the rest of it's the runner's manual, so don't think that I went out of my way to do it. I like to keep things as simple as possible, very minimal instruction, rely on myself, all of that type of stuff. And part of that is just my personality, like professionally, I have to advise people and I'm on crews and things like that. And so when I do my thing, I like to just do my thing, But I've also come to realize that I just operate a lot better the simpler it is. So if I can just go out there with one person as my crew, it's normally my wife, who's a total trooper. She drives the big van around everywhere and makes it to every aid station and tells me exactly what I need to know and nothing more and kind of nothing less.
Yeah.
It only gives me so much sympathy. I just feel that it works a lot better as opposed to having these big, over elaborate crews for me specifically. So yeah, I went super simple. My wife was my crew. I had one of my athletes join up kind of in the later parts to just give Liz a little bit of relief and help show her around and stuff like that. Liz, my wife, a little bit of relief. But yeah, no pacers or anything like that. It was just me, myself, and I the whole time.
Were you with other runners for a lot of it, or were you alone a lot of the time?
I was alone. It was kind of funny. Like Annie and I were just kind of going back and forth and back and forth. Like I would sleep and she'd pass me, and then I'd pass her while we're running. And then I'd sleep and she'd pass me, and then I'd pass her while we're running until the very end. But it was just for very brief. Hey, how you doing? So yeah, it was a lot of alone time.
What are those nighttime sections like for you at night when you're alone? I mean, are they tough, or you're just so used to it now? Did you do a lot of night training?
Well, I run it for 4:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
And so for most of the time, not now, but the time that I was training for this, and then most of the winter, that's full headlamp. The entire time that I'm out. So I'm used to, and I'm certainly not indifferent to going on big night runs and training early in the morning and stuff like that. So it really doesn't faze me all that much. I knew a lot of the course as well that I was going to be running at night, so that I think there's definitely a little bit of a comfort factor in there. But I don't get fazed by running by myself or being by myself in the middle of nowhere with a headlamp and a backpack. It's just something that has just kind of become fairly routine for me, so it doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Usually when I have pacers, it's the night running is more novel to them than it is to me, and that bothers me.
Oh, okay.
They don't have the right lights set up, or they don't exactly know where the course is or whatever.
You feel like you have to take care of them.
Yeah. I mean, not that I'm the best runner in the world and I'm dropping my pacers or whatever, but just yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What was the most surprising thing from the race? Did anything surprise you?
Yeah, to be honest with you, not a lot of surprise. Well, first off, just to start the race, I don't know whether I was just being a pessimist or whatever, but as that fire started to explode, I was just there it goes. I've seen this story 100 times. I was in Tahoe last year when they canceled that, so that maybe there was a little bit of that hanging in the back of my head. So getting to the start line was certainly a big surprise. The other thing is I was surprised at how far I was up in the field for how long I was up there for. I mean, it wasn't until the very end where, I slowed way down. I took a lot of time in my van to make sure that my knee that I'd injured during a part of the course was going to be sustainable for kind of the rest of the race. And part of that is me just not really paying attention to like who else is in the race, because I could kind of care less about that stuff.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is just the unpredictability of these things. Like I did not expect to, be running in the top 3 or top 5 of people for as long as I was up there for. So, in retrospect, that was surprising. But at the time, I really wasn't even thinking about it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Would you do anything differently, whether it be through training or like during the race?
Well, during training, I wish I had a little bit more runway. So, I went through the story. Javelina ends, that's November, right? And I decided to do the race. I needed a little bit of training. That leaves December, January, February, March, April. So that's 5 months to train. I really wanted like 3 more months to and I wasn't cramming things because I was doing some reasonable training beforehand, but still, I mean, I'm coming off of 2 COVID years just like everybody else. I work a ton, training is not my top priority. A lot of people think that for whatever reason. I have a normal office job 90% of the time where I'm sitting behind a computer and talking to people on the phone and whatnot. So I wish I had just a little bit more training runway to let things sink in. But other than those 2 things, not a lot. If I were to really experiment, I would experiment with some sleep deprivation strategies, which I'm not convinced work, but there is some really compelling underlying physiology and a really cool case study that actually just recently came out where the researchers used a very targeted sleep deprivation training intervention with an ultramarathon athlete.
Okay.
And they just found some cool stuff with it that is worth looking at. Yes, it's a case study, it's an N of 1 and all that other stuff, but it's a published case study, which is way better than Fred's anecdote from whatever he did. So if I was toying around with it, I might choose to do that just to kind of see. But overall, it's changed 5% of the whole deal and keep 95% the same. I really feel like I kind of got all I wanted to out of it, and all the preparation worked pretty well.
Yeah, that's great. That's how you know you did it right. Mostly right.
Always room for improvement, though, right? That's what we're always seeking.
Yeah. So how's your recovery been going? You mentioned your knee. Are you recovered or recovering? I'm trying to.
I'm supposed to do Hard Rock in July, and it's super hard to get motivated because I sunk a lot and I burned a lot of matches training for this. A lot of motivation matches training for this because it's a big deal, I really wanted to kind of test my mettle on it. It's a novel course for me. And so I invested a lot of time and energy into the training process. I took my van out to Moab to get out of the snow. I went down to Arizona for a few times, and those for anybody, and even for me, there's only so much resource that you can deploy on that, over time before it has to regenerate. And so I'm still going through that regeneration process of how much do I want to deploy, getting ready for Hard Rock. But I'm about where I thought, we're a month removed from the race right now when we're recording this. I'm about where I thought I would be from a physical standpoint. I'm just lagging a little bit on the desire to get my poles out and start trekking up Pikes Peak and get out to the collegiate peaks and properly train for Hard Rock.
Yeah. But you're still planning to?
I'm still planning to. I mean, something would have to go epically wrong between now and then. I kind of get midsummer races. Nobody's going to care about this, but I'm going to mention it anyway. Midsummer races are really hard for me professionally to do because of my profession, because I spend so much time going out to races, supporting athletes, which I love doing. And I would not trade for the world. That doing races like Western States, like Hard Rock, like Leadville, from a training perspective, become really problematic for me because I'm a professional coach, not a professional runner, and so I'm always going to err on doing my profession versus doing my hobby. And that's why Cocodona fits in so well, right? Because there's not a lot going on in December, January, February, and I can just kind of spend that time training. So the timing is kind of, I'm just bitching and moaning. The timing is kind of compounding on me where I'm running out of it essentially because of a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, that crosses off one of my next questions, which was what's next for you? So Hard Rock would be the next thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then that would be it for this year? Or?
Yeah, I promised somebody that I was going to go out to the East Coast and do a race, so we'll see. We'll see. I still have Nolan's 14 like hanging over my head because I'm 0 for 4 out. Am I 0 for? No, I'm 0 for 3 out there. And I just really want to get it done. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull that off this year. Once again, it's like a timing thing, you know, whether I can get out there and have the perfect weekend and get good training going into it and stuff like that. But that might be after Hard Rock, or there might be something on the East Coast. I don't know, or nothing.
Yeah, or nothing. Just hang out.
Well, I'm scheduled to be in Europe and in the Middle East from August to November. So, you know, that precludes a lot of me. In fact, I get back like right before Javelina. Okay. So that precludes a lot of stuff happening during that time frame. Yeah. Woe is me. Nobody take pity on me.
Your life is so hard.
I know. Nobody take pity on me.
It probably is.
It's very challenging. It's not very hard. It's challenging, and I like the challenge. And I like doing I like doing novel things. I like, you know, when I can get on athlete projects that are super cool, like Timmy's PCT project last year. That's I'm at a stage in my coaching career right now where those things are like super invigorating to me. That's awesome. And I feel like I've got the experience to like add value to that stuff. So unfortunately, there's come at a cost of time where they normally chew up a lot of time and energy and resource. So, you know, it just is what it is. Yeah.
Anything else Cocodona that you would want to share?
Well, it's a cool race. I've had nothing but admiration for the entire Aravaipa staff for many years, and I go to lengths to tell Jamil and his entire team that what a great job that they do at everything. I mean, every experience that I've ever had with them as a coach and as an athlete and as a spectator has just been nothing but the best. And I would encourage athletes that don't think that they can do something like this, that they actually can. I mean, people can do a lot more than they think they can. You know, to pull up an old Ken Klober quote, who's the race director for the Leadville Trail 100, you know, you're better than you think you are, and you can do more than you think you can. And I think in this world of 250-mile races, that latter part of that statement really rings true. And this is a phenomenal opportunity for a lot of athletes to do something like this because it is so very well run. So it's just a cool course. It tells a story. You have the mountains, you have the desert, you've got a little bit of everything. It's really challenging across the board. It's also very accessible. It's easy for crew to get from place to place. It's all highway driving. You don't need to be, you know, nervous or worried about it or anything like that. So people can kind of come with whatever background and be a part of it. So I hope, you know, that this race and races like this really kind of continue to expand because it's done in the right way, and it's not just kind of like filling a market that, you know, needs to be filled. It's a true, authentic race that tells a story and has a background and features all these, you know, significant points in a really neat area of the country. Yeah. And you might run into a Gila monster.
You might see a Gila monster. I guess that's why I have to do it again. To see the Gila monster. Not to improve my time or do the original course, just to see the Gila monster.
I think it's just going to be near Black Canyon City. I don't know if they're like at the higher elevations.
So I have to do it. It has to be on day one. It has to be on day one.
And you have to be paying attention too.
Yeah. No problem for me. I'm going slow enough on that section to pay attention.
Everybody's going slow on that section. That's the only reason I saw it was going slow. Like I said, I almost stepped on it.
Okay, just a few more questions for you. Outside of Cocodona. So just out of curiosity, what's your favorite trail to run in Colorado Springs?
by far the Seven Bridges Trail. And I know there's a lot of new trails in the network, and people, like this or like that. But that's the first true trail that I fell in love with, because I live near Cheyenne Mountain High School, so on the kind of the west side of town, and I could do a counterclockwise loop around the Cheyenne Mountain area, where I would come down Seven Bridges just as the sun was coming up.
Nice.
And I did that so many times, and it was just so magnificent that just ingrained that is my favorite trail to me, that having that experience just like over and over and over and over. So yeah, that's an easy one.
You like it the same going up or down it?
I like going down when I can get the sunrise, but then the rest of the time I like going up.
Okay.
So
Fair.
I'm not pretentious about which direction. It's just a cool trail.
What about favorite place to run in Colorado in general?
The collegiate peaks. Like that whole area from Buena Vista up to Leadville is just, it's stunning, it's accessible. You can get up on a lot of those peaks and you can see the entire Sawatch Range. It's pretty unique in North America, where you can see that many 14ers kind of all at once. And when you're out on like the Nolan's course or any of the 14ers in the area, just being able to see that much elevation gain and elevation loss for that many miles is really unique. So for that combination of things, I just really love it. Plus, it's only like 2 hours from here.
Yeah, super
So it's hard to, it's hard. Yeah, it's got the right combination of everything. Accessibility, you feel like you're in the wild and things like that, and then you can be back eating a freaking burger in no time. So it's great.
What about in the country? Favorite place to run in the country?
The whole Mount Whitney area is really great. That's really remote and rugged back there. I got another dose of that, last summer, and it kind of reinforced how magical that place is. So yeah, I would say anywhere around that, there's kind of like no getting out for a day.
Yeah. What about Sasha's favorite trail?
Well, Sasha's indifferent because she just loves everything. So Sasha, my 5-year-old German Shorthair Pointer, she does have an affection for little small critters. And so because of that, I would say her favorite trail at the favorite time of year would be the regional trail just behind my house, because that's where all the baby deer are starting to be born in just like the next few weeks. And one year, on 2 consecutive days, she found a baby deer that was no more than a few pounds. What? Picked it up and started to bring it to me. What? 2 consecutive days. Oh, different deer, because it's kind of a different area. Didn't hurt the deer, which has got a really soft bite. Trying to bring it back to me, like, look, Dad, look what I found.
Here we go, put it back.
And then I told her to drop it, and she dropped it. But yeah, my dog's favorite trails are definitely the regional trail in the next couple of weeks, but other than that, she doesn't really care. She has a blast when she's out there.
She'll go in.
She's a really good running dog.
That's awesome.
I did find out, I put my old Garmin on her recently, and I found out that she runs anywhere between 10 and 20% further than I do.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have those phi collars.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm always like, how did you get so many steps? It's unfair.
The Garmin's really accurate.
Yeah,
though.
Mine's probably not that accurate.
And I had a phi collar for a while. It did not satiate my desire for accurate data.
Hating on my phi collar.
I know. But yeah, so she loves running, that's for sure.
Very cool. If you could dispel one false piece of information in the ultra running world, what would it be?
Oh, God,
just one.
You're gonna have like 2 hours worth of content on your hands. You ask me that. Just one. I get to pick one.
Yeah. The skinny of what it would be.
Oh man. I mean, it's really a more recent one, to be honest with you, and that's that if you manipulate your diet, you're going to get some sort of superior metabolic adaptation. And what people fail to realize is you can always get that adaptation from in a very transient way. So you withhold calories or you withhold a macronutrient, your body's going to adapt fairly readily. But it adapts in a more robust fashion, primarily through exercise. So while you can use diet to get a little bit of an acute and a very transient adaptation, exercise is the bigger hammer in the room, and that's going to affect your whole all of your metabolics to a much greater extent than you can just simply by manipulating your diet. So all the metabolic magicians that are out there that are trying to, increase their fat oxidation, and they're trying to do this and trying to do that and use fasted training and all this other stuff, you can always get those adaptations in a very acute, a very specific manner, but those adaptations are very transient. And what they fail to realize, and what the myth is that exercise is such a huge hammer that your body uses to manipulate all of your metabolic processes, that it overwhelms all of these other things that people try to do that are usually very trivial in nature, and also are not impactful in the whole metabolic scheme of things, because metabolism is so complex. And when you're trying to focus on one narrow area of metabolism, you forget this whole other sphere of how that metabolism is affected. And normally, exercise is the thing that affects that sphere. Not normally, always, exercise is the thing that affects that sphere the most.
Okay.
I'll get a lot of hate mail for that too.
That's all right.
That's okay. I'm used to it.
Yep. Okay. I think that's all I have for you, unless there's anything else you want the world to know about what Jason Koop is up to.
Oh God, nobody should be worried about me. Go do the race. Seriously, go out there, go crew for the race. I've sung, Aravaipa's praises a lot. I think the live coverage that the team does really brings the race to life. But it is a really cool event. I'm glad it's a part of the whole North American ecosystem of races, because it's a gem. I mean, I think that 20 years from now, we're going to be looking back at this one, especially the first few years, and kind of admiring it at what the team over there has really created. I really think it does have that potential to be something that the world looks at and comes back and looks at it as one of the gems of ultra running.
Awesome. Well, we're happy that you did it and that you had a good experience.
Go ahead. If I didn't have a good experience, would you have invited me?
I don't know,
if I would have bitched and moaned at the end of it because my freaking cheese quesadillas were cold or something like that?
You couldn't find the course. I don't know. But either way, glad you had a good time.
Things like that happen. I mean, come on. Anybody who's bitching and moaning about little things that happen during a 250-mile race don't really realize how hard it is to actually orchestrate. And you changed the first 100K of it at the very last minute. It's like, what do you expect?
Yeah.
So, this is part of the deal.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Welcome to Colorado.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Koop. I know I took some nuggets away from it, and like he said, what he talked about is what works for him, but I think we can all agree that it seems to be working pretty well. So a big thank you to him for coming on the podcast. If you are looking for additional ways to get involved with Aravaipa, we invite you to check out our weekly group runs every Monday night at Fossil Craft Beer in Colorado Springs, as well as our new and existing races on the schedule. We're always looking for volunteers to earn some race credits, especially for our next race, Colorado Springs' first 100-miler, Ring the Springs. We're continuing to add fun ways to get involved every day through group runs, trail work days, community events, and races. Make sure to check it all out at Aravaipa Colorado on Instagram and on our website, aravaiparunning.com. Thanks.